Hey guys, Corey with Camel Adventure Products. This is our 2016 Honda Africa Twin. We've just started riding the bike again after a very cold winter in Alberta, 20, 30 below for a bunch of it with a ton of snow, more than normal. So jump back on the bike, start riding, realize that the brakes don't feel right. Not sure what's going on. So I start poking around having a look. The front rotors have a grayish kind of slime on them. Slime's maybe not the right word. It's thicker. It's not greasy. It's kind of tacky. I don't know what it's from. I thought originally that it was mud that was maybe packed in the calipers. We did some muddy events towards the end of last year, and I didn't take the calipers off and clean them out, which I should have. Totally my fault. So I took the calipers off a few days ago, cleaned everything out, all clean and dry, cleaned the pads, sprayed them down with brake clean, and brushed them with a fine wire brush to get all the stuff out of them. Put them back on the bike. After we cleaned the rotors off, put them all back on the bike, went out for a ride, came back, and we've got the exact same thing. We've got this gray stuff smeared on the rotors. You can see kind of this stuff here, and it looks like the rotors are scored, and they're not. Like you can rub it off. So I don't know what it is. I've given up trying to clean it, being that they're brakes, they're kind of important. So we're just going to go ahead and change the pads out. So I've got some new brake pads. These are factory Honda ones, so they're semi-metallic pads. I would have looked at some other brands and some other options, but we are headed to Odessa, Washington in a couple of days for the Desert 100 race. So we're racing the Africa Twin in the adventure bike class, and we're unable to get ECB or Galfer or anything like that. So back to the factory pads, and hopefully the gray goo doesn't start oozing out of these, or I'm going to be unimpressed. Changing out brake pads on this bike is a very straightforward process. No tricks, no special tools required. 14 mil ratchet or wrench to get the caliper bolts out. And I recommend a small chunk of hose, and you're going to want some brake fluid. You don't need to bleed the brakes, but you're going to lose a little bit of fluid, and I'll explain why in a minute. We've got our high fender kit on this bike, so this is going to look a little bit different than if you have the factory low fender. It doesn't change the process for actually doing the brake pads. With the brake hose right here, I'm going to loosen the banjo bolt and just move the hose over, because the hose is blocking access to this bolt. And then we're going to take these two bolts out. You don't need to use air tools to get these out, but we have air in the shop, so we're going to go ahead and use it. And once that's done, you can just wiggle the caliper off, and there are the pads. They wouldn't normally need to be changed. There's lots of meat on the pads, but like I said, there's all kinds of stuff oozing out of them, so we got to take them out. So the pads have tabs on them, and the calipers have grooves in them. So that's really all that retains the pads. You slide them in from the center and then back over. So to get them out, we're just going to slide them over, but with this pad in and the pistons pushed out, there's not enough room to get the pad past. If these are really worn, you may get them out without pushing the pistons in, but that's not the situation that we have here. So a bike mechanic friend of mine showed me this trick, and at first I thought it was totally unnecessary, and then after I had an issue with one of my bikes, it made a lot more sense. When we push these pads in, the pistons move, and in order for them to move, they have to move the fluid out of the caliper. That fluid travels up the hoses, and depending on your system, will go into your ABS system or into your master cylinder. The brake fluid that's in the calipers is in the worst condition of any fluid on the bike because of the heat generated between the pads and the rotor. This stuff is not in good shape. So why do we want to push that back up the system into the better fresh fluid up top? Well, of course we don't. So when we're pushing the pistons in, if you back the bleed screw off, we're going to put a hose on here and get a small container I'm going to back that bleed screw off. So when we go to push the pistons into the caliper, the fluid that it's displacing is the bad stuff. And then we can tighten the bleed screw. And if that's done correctly, we wouldn't have got any air in the system, so we don't need to bleed anything. But now the little bit of fluid that came out is not going back into the system. It may seem like overkill, but it definitely would fall under best practices as far as I can tell. So with that done, you can pop these pads out. And with the pistons moved over, they slide out quite easily. And there's a stainless steel backing plate in here. It's spring loaded and it keeps the pads from rattling. So these are the new pads. It's best to not touch these. You have the oil in your hand, it gets on the pad, dirt sticks to the oil, and then you can get brakes squeal, you can get scoring and things on the rotors. So you don't want to touch the meat on here. If you have rubber gloves, it's best to wear them. So obviously the pad here isn't rectangular. It's got a rounded profile on it to match the shape of the rotor. And that's going to just drop in. Again, you can just slide that in. And I'm just using a screwdriver to get these set in here. I'm not prying very hard. I'm just sliding it over. If you pry too hard, you can crack the material on the pad. And that's it. They're all loaded. And then normally we would just slide this back on and bolt it down. That would be the end of the job. Because we have all this stuff on the rotors, I'm going to have to wipe them down with brake clean first. All right, so we've got the rotors all cleaned off, and we're just going to put the calipers back on. The caliper bolts have Loctite on them, so we're just going to go over to the wire wheel and we're going to clean these off before we put them back in. With the bolts clean, we're going to put some Loctite on them again. And then we can go around and do the other side. And again, I'm just going to clean the rotors. All right, and with that clean, we can put the caliper back on. And again, clean up the caliper bolts to get the old Loctite off. And then we're going to put new Loctite on. So after we've got the pads installed and everything reassembled, it's important to come to the front before you go for a ride, and you're gonna pull the front brake lever a few times. And you're gonna notice it's very soft. It's because there's a big gap right now between the pads and the rotor, and the master cylinder does not push very much fluid. So as you pull the master cylinder in, the pads are gonna get a little bit closer, a little bit closer, a little bit closer, until they're touching, and that's normal. So you want to make sure you do this in the garage, that you don't get to the end of your street and go to stop at the light and pull the brake lever and there's nothing there. So that's 2 pumps, 3 pumps, 4 pumps, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. They just contacted at 9. So you can imagine if you rode to the end of your street after doing your brakes and you came up to a light, you pulled the brake lever in and there was nothing there, and then you pulled it again and again and again. You would have to pull it 9 times before you got any front brake feel. And obviously by then it's probably too late and you've crashed into whatever you were hoping to avoid. So when you're done, you're going to have a look at your reservoir. Focus. You're going to have a look at your reservoir here. We've got a bubble here, but that is unrelated. That would have been the last time we filled it. We ended up with that. But just make sure that your fluid level is in the acceptable range, which ours is. But as you can tell, after 9 pumps on the front brake, you've moved quite a bit of fluid. So just be aware of that. That wraps up our video on how to change brake pads on the Honda Africa Twin. Please be advised, I'm not a mechanic, motorcycle or otherwise. We wanted to put the video together just as a visual aid on how to do it. If you have any concerns at all about this task, definitely take your bike to the dealer or to a certified motorcycle mechanic shop to have it done. Thanks for watching. Any questions, you can get a hold of me, info@cameltank.com. I'm not a mechanic, motorcycle or otherwise, so this video is just intended to be used as a visual aid. I'm not a mechanic, motorcycle or otherwise. We just wanted to put this video together as a visual aid. Visual? What the is visual? I've never said visual in my life until tonight.